Jeff, thank you so much for coming to this episode at the Across Border podcast. Today we're having Jeffrey Summers from the Wisconsin University, where he's a professor in public policy and political economy, also Fulbright and visiting professor at the Faculty of Political Science in Cluj at Babeș-Bolyai University. Thank you so much for the invitation. I think we can start with the question on everybody's minds. How is the world perceiving the first 100 days of Trump administration, and what's happening? What can we see after this 100 days?
Well, Tony, first, it's great being here. It's always a delight to engage you on both the professional and personal level. So thank you for the invitation.
My pleasure.
It's great being back in Cluj. I think people have been surprised by the magnitude and speed of policies that Trump has been introducing, compared or contrasted with his first term. His first term, I don't think he actually expected to win. Mm-hmm. So he found himself somewhat at a loss for what to do. But it's clear that he ran for office this past fall with the intention of winning, had a program for what he would do when he captured that office, and they are most aggressively putting that into some action. So we can talk about the huge, I think, reboot of the entire global order that the Trump administration has proposed. I mean, it's really stunning in its size and vision. Now, I don't think Trump always has a very deep command over precisely the particulars of what they wish to do. But he's one of those people that has a very good grasp over everything at the shallowest of levels. So there's this great breadth without any depth. So he could kind of explain to you what they want to do. But if you really wanted to get a good grasp of what the Trump administration wishes to do, you have to look to the head of his Council of Economic Advisors, where there is a Harvard-trained economist, a guy named Stephen Moran, did his doctorate in economics in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he proposes introducing tariff policy for an entirely reimagined U.S. structure that would take us away from the days of the past 4 decades or 5 decades in which the United States dollar was central to organizing the global system and providing the United States with really, really great benefits in terms of other countries having to hold dollars. And what does that mean? That means extending, in a sense, massive interest-free loans to the U.S., all these countries holding massive amounts of dollars. And in effect, allowing the United States to ignore the so-called laws of economics. So if you grab your freshman-level economics textbook, what it will tell you is that when countries become somewhat uncompetitive and they begin importing more goods than they export, in other words, when their current account becomes imbalanced, well, then what happens is an automatic adjustment to your currency. That if you're importing more than you're exporting, the value of your currency declines. And
Inflation.
Then that brings everything ultimately back into balance. Now, when that happens, that means that your population loses some power in terms of consumption. But with the United States, the past near half century, we've completely defied the laws of economics in that we have become this massive importer of goods while not exporting anywhere near as much as we are importing. And yet, what happens to our currency? Does it go down in value? The opposite. It continues to strengthen. So this is what our former vice president, Dick Cheney, who many people thought was the real president under George W. Bush, meant when he said Ronald Reagan proved deficits don't matter. In other words, government spending that deficits don't matter. You can just keep taxes low and continue to spend. The problem is, and going back to economics, there is, or was, I should say, a Belgian economist in the 1960s, a guy named Robert Triffen, who defined the problem of reserve currencies. So the dollar, again, is the world's reserve currency. And what happens after a period of time when you build a really successful reserve currency? What happens is that, referencing your high school physics classes, the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. So any order that you establish ultimately succumbs to its contradictions and falls apart. Same thing with a reserve currency. At some point, what happens is it allows you to engage in so much government deficit spending that your industry becomes hollowed out because you can't be really competitive if your currency is valued so highly, right?
Yep.
So no one's going to be buying much from you. And you're also, of course, going to be spending, in terms of your government, bigly, as Trump might say. But at a certain point, while you're enjoying this free lunch, all of a sudden, global bondholders get nervous and at one point might bolt for the doors, the exits, that you could get a herd response in which the herd gets spooked and they begin selling off all of your bonds. And what could happen in that context is all of a sudden your borrowing costs for the federal government shoots straight up because all of a sudden you'll have to pay a lot more in the way of interest rates to finance your deficits. And you'll find yourself still, though, without this manufacturing base to support your economy. So it could be disastrous. So the Trump administration, I think, in this sense, as much as I dislike them, rightly does identify a real problem. And
A potential problem.
And we just saw with one of the rating agencies this past week that for the first time the United States has been downgraded from its AAA rating. So there is some concern about this. Now, it may be that in some sense it's the Trump administration that has spooked the herd by discussing what the problem is instead of just pretending it doesn't exist, but also the rather sloppy way in which they've handled it. Steve Moran is actually a quite competent economist. I would call him a heterodox economist. He looks at things in very counterintuitive ways. And he does make, in some papers that he published last fall, some rather compelling cases for how you could introduce tariffs in a very specific way and in conditions in which you had macroeconomic stability, really low inflation, not doing anything to unnerve people or the markets.
Like the EU?
Like the Trump administration did in 2017-18. They introduced some tariffs on China, but they were relatively modest. And it was done during a time where the labor markets were very, very stable. Inflation was really low. They didn't make that big of a fuss about it, and it kind of just got ignored. Moran talks about this and how this can be done maybe up to the level of a 20% tariff under these really stable conditions. But then this goes through the kind of crazy slot machine of a Donald Trump where he pulls the lever and all the gears start spinning, and the next thing you know, he's talking about 145% tariffs, and it just really goes against creating the kind of environment that you would need to do this. So what we saw with Donald Trump, for the first time, he got disciplined by the markets.
So that was the first.
Yes, he received some unpleasant phone calls
Do you think so?
Oh, yes. We know this for sure.
China.
From Wall Street.
Wall Street.
China just kind of ignored Trump. I mean,
They knew it in a way.
Yeah, and they just know that their situation is so solid and that the United States is, in a state of decline. And it's not as if they can completely ignore it, but they know that their hand, to use that metaphor that Trump used in his meeting with Zelensky, where he kept telling him he has no cards. Oh, the United States has no cards compared to China, but that's another matter. But Wall Street did get him on the phone, and some representatives of U.S. electronics companies and others, and they said, "Look, you really need to calm down. You're causing This was now following what Trump called Liberation Day. This was April 2nd, where he introduced these very, very big tariffs. And
interesting name, by the way.
Oh, yes, yes. And after about a week of this, of course, everything started going awry. Stock markets went down by about 10%. Borrowing costs went up. It was not looking good, and it was appearing as though it could devolve very quickly. So they got him on the phone and they read him the Riot Act. And they just said, look, you have to fix this. And this reminds me of, my apologies for colorful language, but it's the language that Bill Clinton reported during his first term as president when he came into the office. As he said, upon discovering that, you mean I can't do what I want because of a bunch of bond traders?
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what Trump discovered here, that no, he could not just introduce whatever tariff rates that he wanted. He had to scale them back, and he did. And the markets have calmed down since. But the United States, I mean, if you have time for me to talk a little bit more about the history of this. Yeah, I mean, of course, in the post-World War II period, I mean, the United States was an economic giant in terms of manufacturing.
As a share of the total
of world manufacturing. Absolutely. And
because in comparison with what's happening right now, it's not necessarily
exactly completely different. I mean, if you take a look, let's go back, say, to the 1970s. The three biggest employers in the United States were General Motors, Ford, and Exxon.
Okay.
So two big auto companies, and then the fuel to power them.
Yep.
So, and they supplied lots of high-paying jobs. Today, the three biggest employers in the United States are Walmart, so selling consumer goods that are imported from China. Home Depot, selling construction materials that are imported from Canada and China. And Amazon. So a completely different profile in terms of our labor market and far lower wages than these other sectors once paid. But to return to point, post-World War II, United States, the greatest manufacturing power in the world, a position it held really since the 1880s, frankly, but just a giant coming out of World War II. And at that time, what was recognized was that the rest of the world needed our goods, since they decided to commit this kind of collective suicide with World War II, with all sorts of destroyed manufacturing. And they were going to need to buy U.S. goods. There were going to be big deficits at first with countries importing our goods. And what was recognized was that we needed to make sure that the U.S. dollar would circulate in the global economy. And so the thing that was done was to create confidence in the U.S. dollar. We linked it to gold at the rate of 35 U.S. dollars to 1 ounce of gold. Meaning that, let's say you began getting your industry back in order, you started exporting some things to the United States, and you received some dollars in return. But what's this paper money here? I mean, we saw this in the first half of the 20th century, where currencies collapsed. I'm thinking about Weimar Germany, et cetera. So how do you restore that confidence to get the economy moving and to get money in circulation and trust? So link it to gold.
But that was lifted.
So what happens is what happens is that after 20 years following World War II, Japan, several West European countries, they begin to restore their manufacturing, and they go beyond what the United States envisioned them being able to do in terms of sophistication. Now, the first country that really began to develop some trade imbalances with the United States, as in trade surpluses with the United States, was France. So in 1960,
Agriculture products?
yes. And so in 1965, Charles de Gaulle, somebody who had mixed relations with the United States, begins to look at the United States economy and says, well, what's going on here? You have all of this government spending. You're engaged in this program of massive social reform. You also you've inherited the war from us in Vietnam, halfway around the world. It's not cheap to fight a war, literally halfway around the world. And you are cutting your taxes. Well, this just doesn't add up. So if you don't mind, our central bank, and this rule of $35 to an ounce of gold was for central banks only, our central bank is going to go to the Department of Treasury in the United States and say, if you don't mind, we'll take our gold, thank you. Fine if just France does it, but what if Japan starts doing it, and Germany and others? So eventually, by 1971, the United States, recognizing it has a problem, as the rest of, well, not the rest of the world, but as some parts of the world become so successful in terms of becoming manufacturing powers, they just announce one day, there's no warning, the dollar no longer is linked to gold. So whatever dollars you have, that's great. It's your problem now. Whatever you want to do with them. Trade them whatever you can get for them, get for them. The result of this was the value of the dollar fell by about 20%. So several West European countries were unhappy about this if they had built up any surpluses of dollars.
Yeah.
You don't like it when, one day you're told your money is worth 20% less. And the purpose of that was, again, to rebalance the system, make American industry competitive again, because that gave us a 20% drop in prices globally for our goods. And over the course of the 1970s, we kind of find our way to this new reserve currency system where we realize that the biggest advantage that the United States possesses is not just our manufacturing, it's our currency. It's convertible. It's liquid. You can invest in our treasury debt. We've got two big oceans on either side of us, so nobody's going to invade us. And so, especially for rich oil producing countries of the time, and of course we have to remember the 1970s, we saw 1,000% increase in the price of oil. So especially like on the Arabian Peninsula, we tell the heads of these states, you don't have anywhere to put your money. So, and that's the big risk throughout world history, is the destruction of wealth. John Maynard Keynes, the famous British economist, once opined, he said, if you had one penny, just one penny, in the year of our Lord's birth, 2,000 years ago, and at normal rates of compound interest, if you could hold it for 2,000 years roughly, it would be worth a sphere of gold the size of the planet Earth.
Wow.
Now, the point that he was making was that nobody's got a sphere of gold the size of the planet Earth. So what's happened again and again and again is the destruction of wealth.
Yeah. So Jeff, thank you for the wonderful explanation and very, very thoroughly done. But let me help me understand it a bit better. How is the Trump administration proposing this readjustment? So what do they plan to do effectively?
Well, it's an incredible plan in terms of its boldness and vision, really. What they
Are you sarcastic?
No. I'm actually being quite serious.
Okay.
But it is Donald Trump that is totally unserious and will probably mess this up in terms of trying to implement it. But does he have serious people behind him? Yes, he does have a few. Now, many of the people in his cabinet and his government are ridiculous, and you see them, of course. These are the people that are representing him. The serious people he likes to keep hidden for whatever reasons. So let's talk about what they're actually hoping to do. One is, again, they want to reintroduce industry to the United States on a more widespread basis. Of course, we still have industry, but we want more. Why is that important? Well, Donald Trump is of the view, and many in his administration, and this seems to be a bad American habit regardless. We think that the world is a very threatening place and that we have to police it. Now, Trump isn't so interested in policing it because he thinks that's a sucker's game, as he might frame it. It's very expensive, and all it does is bankrupt the United States and results in lots of cost for us. On that, I would roughly agree with him. But he still sees potential threats, especially from China. And so a deindustrialized United States can't really make weapons. And that's something that we're beginning to discover already, that supply chains are stretched so thin and there are so many gaps in them now. And this is what we discovered from the war in Ukraine.
Yes.
That we could not, we could not ramp up production very quickly of many munitions, even something as basic as artillery shells. We had to go to Turkey for some of the specialized machinery that we needed. Yes, right. So that's a problem. So we want to reindustrialize. Now, tariffs are the chief instrument by which you can rebalance this trade, reduce reliance on the dollar as a reserve currency, but also, this is the big benefit from the perspective of Donald Trump, reduce taxes. So somebody at some point whispered in Donald Trump's ear that the U.S. government was not always funded by these income and corporate taxes, you know. Before 1907, we didn't even have them. They didn't exist. We funded everything by tariff and alcohol taxes. I think this probably really captured Trump's attention, that in the 19th century, the United States had some of the highest tariff rates in the world, that we developed our industry behind these protective walls, and that it brought in all the revenue that the country needed. So tariffs are going to be the way of making America great again. Now, there are other things that need to be done in order to make America great again. Among them are looking to some lessons from the fairly recent past, let's say the 1980s and 1990s. Restore cheap commodity prices, food, fuel, minerals, etc. We saw the United States do this in the 1980s, largely through the debt crisis, which threw the entire rest of the world into a massive recession. But it dropped commodity prices, then the U.S. economy, and then later the rest of the global economy kind of took off. Russia, then the Soviet Union in the 1980s, but then in the Yeltsin years, Russia and the former Soviet bloc were a big part of that. They brought all of these cheap commodities onto global markets, which made prices decline. Now, that's another thing, of course, that we've learned from the war with Ukraine, is that initially it disrupted supplies of grain and oil. And so Donald Trump wants to reverse this. The other thing that Donald Trump has talked about since his first term in office, especially with regards to oil, the phrase that he uses is drill, baby, drill. We're going to produce a lot of oil in the United States, and we're going to be both rich and consumers are going to have cheap fuel prices because of this. Well, there's that, and that's very politically popular, but there's more to it as well. And that is that the United States does have some competitive advantages beyond its reserve currency, which they see disappearing, but with artificial intelligence and space. Now, they don't like to talk about space too much, I think, for a variety of reasons, but they will talk about AI if you engage them. And the one thing that they reference is that the AI revolution is going to require massive amounts of energy. And so we have to go away from the greening of our economy and get back to getting energy wherever we can get it. The system also pivots and sees the United States going to a more sphere of influence model, returning to a pre-kind of World War II model in which the United States has control mostly over the Western Hemisphere, kind of leaves Europe to its own devices, mostly. But it would be lovely if you bought more weapons from us.
Mm.
That, of course, provides hard currency for the United States. So we are hoping European states will buy more weapons from us, rely less on a U.S. troop presence, that we become a player in the Arctic sea lanes that are going to open up, ergo the United States' interest in Greenland, and even trolling Canada, which seems very unwise, but nonetheless, that's what Trump seems to like to do. So these are all the ways that they propose achieving these goals. But then there's one more thing that they need to do from their perspective, and this comes from long-standing Trump advisor Steve Bannon, who sees himself as one half Lenin and one half Gramsci. Lenin in terms of acting fast, in terms of a revolution, Gramsci in terms of understanding the importance of culture. And that is to create a new culture in the United States that celebrates the achievements of the country, that does not denigrate or look too closely at U.S. history. And that means, from their perspective, capturing the commanding heights of cultural production. So destroying our universities would be very helpful if one wants to do this. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that this is where our scientific research is done as well. And so these massive cuts that we're seeing to our universities, which are designed to somehow remake them, is resulting in a loss of research capacities and innovation, a reverse brain drain, which
is already happening.
Oh, it's already happening, just as you're saying. And so this is really going to hurt the United States. Is the plan bold? Really, it is. Can they pull it off? I really don't think so.
Is this exode of brain, the so-called brain drain, happening only in the academics, or is it happening among the richest?
Yeah, right now. I mean, there was this very visible but symbolic loss of some celebrities and others who made a big fuss about Donald Trump being such a unpleasant person that they were leaving the country. But now it's getting serious. We do have top researchers that are leaving the United States. So not only do we have American researchers leaving for both Canada and for Europe, but we don't have, and maybe this is actually good for the sending countries, they're not sending us our talent anymore. Let me give you an example with my public university, the University of Wisconsin system. So at my campus, Milwaukee, in the early 1990s, we received a young master's degree student in computer science from India. Today, he is the CEO of Microsoft. So we have these people who have come to the United States, tendered all of their talent, and we benefit massively from this. Well, because of all this visa trouble that's been created in an attempt to make America great again, keep the country suitably, I guess, white, these students are not coming anymore in the same numbers. So with our South Asian students who paid essentially they supported the rest of the university through paying a lot more tuition than local residents. Their numbers are down 50% at our university. So we've lost a few thousand of them, really, really killing our budgets while losing all this talent. So really great for India.
Or other countries.
Yes, yeah. I mean, in some senses, of course, it's been criminal that these countries have spent all these resources, bring people up to adulthood only to lose them to us. So in this one way, perhaps we're doing them a favor. We'll see.
Yeah. What is the role of Eastern European countries, and especially Romania, in this readjustment that we're seeing and experiencing right now? Right? You mentioned these 6 or 7 main paths through which the United States consider the readjustment.
Yes.
Some of them are clearly related, like the spheres of influence, right? But what about the other? Do we still play a special role, a special relation type of role with the United States, or not?
Right. We just don't know. There are, from the perspective of many in Central and East Europe, alarming signals, of course, from the Trump administration in terms of a pullback from the region. But it's unclear just how serious that pullback is going to be. So, for instance, as we know, there are negotiations or At least they're having this performative exercise of negotiations between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States right now. Purportedly, Trump is starting to get quite irritated with Vladimir Putin. And if they don't come to an agreement, Trump may respond by carrying through with his threat to push a lot more weapons into Ukraine, just to show that he's tough. Or he may just respond with more sanctions, which I don't think really hurt Russia that much. They've learned to weather those quite nicely. But if he responds with more weapons, and if relations do not improve with Russia, then I think the relationship will remain somewhat similar to what it has been since the 1990s. And of course, that's when we saw during the Clinton administration, the region became very important for United States policymakers. So we'll see. For those who see the United States as providing security, I can understand why they would be very unnerved by this significant change or shift in rhetoric coming out of Washington. So it's a little too early to tell. But I think we can already see that countries in the region are looking more toward cooperation with each other. For security, recognizing that the United States may not always be there to provide this military presence, which we can have a debate on. I mean, in some ways, it actually destabilizes the region and aggravates Russia, and then both Central and East European countries are reacting to legitimately fear from Russia. The Russians are reacting to fear from the United States, placing missile systems on its borders, and everyone is acting aggressively. And that tends to worsen the situation for everyone. So we'll just have to see how things go.
It was not necessarily a very smart movement. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Okay. So where do you see us, the world, in the next 100 days? Is it, at least from this part of the world, we see more and more people fighting in various ways, trying to make to find a way to resist to these changes. Do you see it in the same way? Do you think it's going down? It has one of the lowest ever share of people supporting the policies proposed by the Trump administration, or at least this was the way it was reported.
Yes. There was a brief period, I would say up through to early May, where the numbers were really going against Trump. And so you probably saw all these stories which showed that since political polling has been done in the United States with presidents for the first 100 days, that you have to go back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 1930s. That's when they started. That if you went all the way back to that period, that Donald Trump's 2 terms both had him with the lowest approval ratings of any president. His low numbers, disapproval numbers, peaked roughly 3 weeks ago or so. Now, this was before he got those Wall Street calls telling him to stop. So once we got to that point again, where the markets had lost 10% of their value, bond prices, or rather rates had to go up in order to attract investors, et cetera, everything was looking really unsettled. The public responded to that environment, and Trump understands people and he understands opinion. He's actually very good at this. I mean, that's because he was in reality TV for a couple of decades. And of course, he does these big stadium tours. And he seems to know, and he's somebody who watches a lot of television, morning news programs, things like this, which news is perhaps used very loosely in terms of these programs. They just more or less tell you about the mood of the public. So I think he has a good sense of that. So he adjusted very quickly. He didn't just keep going with this program. He really scaled it back. And since he's done that, his approval ratings are starting to go back again. His disapproval ratings are moderating a little bit. So the current spread that I've seen is that his disapproval numbers are some 3.3% apart from his approval numbers, whereas they had reached a peak of about 7%, that gap, following some of these big changes that he made. So we'll see. The trend line right now is towards his numbers improving. So we'll see how far that goes.
But what about the political system? Do we see this shift, this drift for populism, or changes, deep changes in the political system? He promised a lot of changes in the institutional setting. Are they happening? Because this is not a part of the context that we're necessarily observing here.
Right. I think what he might deliver on, it's really too early to say, but he might be keeping this powder dry for a crisis, and that is to really reduce income taxes. And that would be, I think, very popular. So I think that's something that at some point he's going to roll out, and that will be very popular. I mean, he talked also about when he was campaigning, and I think he does intend to do this. It's a matter of when, dropping taxes on our Social Security system, which is our pension system. Now, if you have low income anyway, it really doesn't matter because you're really not taxed on it, but it's the kind of thing that sounds great. He also wants to remove taxes from what are called tipped wages. So when you go to a restaurant and you pay 10 or 15% or 20%, whatever you're tipping, he wants to remove all of that. And so that's a big class of workers that would see a direct benefit from that. But these would all, of course, blow further holes in budgets. But presidents don't seem to care too much about that kind of thing. They let the next guy figure it out, or woman when we finally get one in that role. So I think these are things that he might do to improve his popularity. Now, he's also pressuring drug companies to lower prescription prices. So he is kind of issuing orders. He doesn't do things through legislation, which takes time, and you have to talk to people. It's better to
be partisan.
Yeah. So instead, he gets on the phone with people, and he goes on television. He says, "Hey, fellas, it's big pharma. I'm really unhappy with these drug prices. You got to do something about this."
Very authoritarian way.
Yeah. He did, but the public seems to like it. Some members of the public. Same thing with, say, Apple, which is making big investments in India, seeing this kind of Thucydides trap environment emerging with China. And Donald Trump said there too, "Hey, you guys are moving a lot of production, it looks like, to India. Why is that not coming to the United States?" So we'll see how effective these threats are. Yeah, it may be in the United States.
Speaking, at least, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, he does have instruments that he can use to punish people within the country or companies within the country, but very few abroad. So he's discovered how weak his position is abroad, especially with China. But
which is strange in a way, right? Because this is the type of tools you would need for foreign companies, for people.
Oh yeah. And it's the Republican Party, which historically has been very much against picking winners and losers in the economy, and they believe, at least purportedly, in free markets and all the rest. Some of them are becoming unsettled by this. So there's this kind of pre-MAGA Republican establishment that still exists. And they don't like this at all. So if his approval numbers get bad again, combined with stuff like this, it could result in some blowback against it. But as long as he's popular among the Republican Party base, then they're mostly just staying quiet, this establishment. And if one goes on social media comment boards for news sites and all the rest, there's a massive number of people who have been mobilized, weaponized really, to just flood these sites with really hostile, aggressive language. Yeah. So it's really gotten quite bad, and it's a very unpleasant environment in terms of what was once purported to be a kind of new public commons, in the 1990s. Right now, it's just.
Yeah, and as a scholar, Do you particularly experience this violence and this type of attitude
Well,
in a negative sense?
I'm interested in what the public is thinking, so I do spend a significant amount of time looking at these comment boards and even participating, just to get a sense of what people are thinking. And of course, it's impossible to have a rational discussion with these people. They're very skilled at just coming up with some stupid insults or whatever. So I think it's not an exaggeration to say that the significant part of the population has been weaponized to just disrupt anything like meaningful, rational discourse or debate. There is a kind of, Khmer Rouge-like Mao cultural revolution type environment where these MAGA people see the university as possessing all of these counter-revolutionary elements, and that they somehow need to have dunce caps put on top of their heads or whatever and humiliated, if at all possible. So I think the academy is probably viewed in the lowest esteem that it ever has been right now in the United States. So it's kind of interesting.
Jeff, I know that you've been involved and in contact with with Europe and especially with Eastern Europe for 3 decades now.
Yes.
And you've been based in Riga for a few years, right? And
yes, I started coming to Riga in 1995
so
with some regularity, and for
3 decades.
over a decade had a visiting professorship at the Stockholm School of Economics in Riga.
Exactly. And I guess you've been seen and received differently in the 90s when the United States universities and the expertise coming from there was one of the lights, to guide research and so on. And I'm curious, how do you perceive it right now? Was there any change in this regard?
Well, there's been a big change. In the 1990s, coming into Riga from the United States, it was like top commissars coming in from Moscow. We were feted and treated as experts with scientific knowledge that was unquestioned. It was very unique. And of course, I was always telling my students and colleagues, you really need to be questioning us more in terms of what we're saying, because the social sciences are, despite their name, an art rather than a science. So the environment has changed dramatically in the ensuing decades. I think people looked at the United States in the 1990s as a model that they could somehow just copy. And what they saw was really, in effect, a society that was constructed during the 1930s, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was being dismantled by Ronald Reagan, and then later, I guess we could call them neoliberals, even in the Democratic Party thereafter. But in the 1990s, this wasn't visible to people in Central and East Europe yet. So they viewed it as just a very well-functioning, prosperous, culturally dynamic environment, which they wanted to copy in any way that they could. So over time, of course, they became more critical of the United States, which I think is a good thing. The 2008 financial shock gave people a very big wake-up call regarding how things could go wrong, that markets did not always deliver positive outcomes, as was assumed previously. Students have always been, to my mind, quite good. And I think this probably just extends back to these more traditional academic settings that you have, where there is arguably a higher regard for academic expertise. So not too much change over the past 30 years in that way. Although I would say students in the 1990s were among the best that I've ever observed anywhere. They came with, and again, in the 1990s and even say up to the 2008 economic shock, to places like the Stockholm School of Economics in Riga, which attracted students from over the entire Baltic state area and also from Ukraine, Moldova, etc. The students were hungry. They knew that this was their one shot. And they came in, frankly, with fantastic levels of training in math,
Reading.
and reading, and just lots of content. So now we have all this fashionable discourse about critical thinking. Okay, yeah, that's all great, but you have to come in knowing stuff first, and they knew stuff, and so they were a joy to work with. They really were. I still look back to those years as the high point, let's say, of my teaching career. So,
yeah, really interesting.
yes.
Jeff, thank you so much for coming here today. It was a real pleasure. I hope to see you in the next episodes, maybe next year.
Great.
If the Fulbright continues, or our partnership continues in one way or another. So thank you so much.
Well, it's a delight seeing you again, and I hope our partnership continues in some way.
Thank you, Jeff.